Look up at any high-voltage transmission line and you'll see the same thing. Thick cables strung tower to tower, carrying enough electricity to light entire cities, sagging gently under their own weight against the sky. You'd assume something carrying that much power, that far, would be built from the best conductor money can buy. Copper has been the standard for electrical wiring for more than a century. The metal inside your walls, your phone charger, your car, quietly doing its job wherever electricity needs to move efficiently. And yet almost none of it is up there. Those towers are carrying aluminum, a metal that loses to copper on the one property that seems like it should matter most. So why does the less conductive metal win the job that matters more than any other? Let's get into it right here on Small Things. Not a close contest. Conductivity is simply a measure of how easily electricity moves through a material, how little resistance it meets on its way from one end of a wire to the other. Engineers measure it against a fixed benchmark. Pure copper, set at 100%, aluminum comes in well below that, conducting electricity at only about 61% of copper's rate for the same thickness of wire, a gap that shows up the moment you compare two identical strands side by side. That is not a close contest. Ounce for ounce, inch for inch, copper genuinely does move electricity better than aluminum ever will. If conductivity alone decided which metal hangs from a transmission tower, this would already be a very short video. A door the war forced open. It did not begin with a wartime shortage at all. It began in 1908 when engineers solved a much narrower problem. Aluminum wire on its own was too soft to support its own weight across any real distance, sagging and stretching under tension until it was effectively useless for a long span between towers. Copper had no such weakness, which was exactly why it had been the obvious default for electrical wiring since the earliest days of long-distance power transmission. Reinforcing aluminum with a second material solved its structural weakness without giving up the advantages that had made engineers curious about it in the first place. The fix worked, and it worked well, more than 3 decades before anyone needed it to solve a supply crisis. For most of those 3 decades, that solution sat mostly on the margins of the industry. A handful of utilities strung aluminum lines through mountainous or remote terrain, where hauling and installing heavy copper cable was genuinely difficult, and a lighter alternative justified the switch on its own merits. Everywhere else, copper remained the default, not because it was clearly the better engineering choice for every single line, but because an industry stringing thousands of new miles of cable a year had little appetite for questioning a material that already worked, was already understood, and required no one to relearn anything. Aluminum stayed a regional workaround rather than a national standard, useful in specific circumstances, but never seriously challenging copper's position everywhere else. Then the Second World War made that question unavoidable. Copper was suddenly needed everywhere else first, diverted into shell casings, radios, and the wiring of military equipment being built by the millions, and utilities that needed new transmission capacity simply could not get enough of it to build with, regardless of how much they were willing to pay. For the first time, the entire industry had every reason to reach for a solution that had been sitting quietly on the shelf since 1908, tested, proven, and mostly ignored outside a handful of specific projects. It was not a new idea rescuing the grid in a sudden crisis. It was an old idea, already 3 decades into its own quiet track record, finally getting the chance it had been waiting for all along. Every extra kilogram has to hang. So, how does a less conductive metal end up carrying the power for an entire region? The answer starts with what happens when you simply make the aluminum wire thicker instead of trying to match copper strand for strand. Aluminum weighs only about 30% as much as copper for the same volume. So a bare aluminum wire built thick enough to match a copper wire's electrical resistance still ends up weighing roughly half as much overall. Every extra kilogram in that cable has to hang unsupported between two towers that might be hundreds of meters apart. So a cable that weighs half as much changes the entire structure underneath it. Lighter cable means less tension pulling on each tower, less material required in the tower itself, and a foundation that does not need to fight gravity quite as hard just to stay standing. But a thicker aluminum wire on its own has a problem. Aluminum is soft, and a cable spanning that kind of distance needs tensile strength, the ability to resist being stretched and pulled apart under its own weight, and the force of wind and ice. That is where the design most transmission lines actually use gets its name. Aluminum conductor steel reinforced, or ACSR. Picture a cable built in two layers, the way a climbing rope hides a strong core inside a flexible outer sheath. A steel core runs straight through the center, carrying almost none of the electricity but nearly all of the mechanical load. Strands of aluminum wrap around that core and carry the current itself. Neither material is doing the other's job. The aluminum conducts. The steel holds everything up. What is easy to miss is that this is not the only design in use. Some conductors skip the steel core entirely and use aluminum alloys strong enough to support their own weight over shorter spans. The specific cable changes with the job. What never changes is the underlying trade, a little conductivity given up in exchange for a cable light enough and eventually strong enough to span whatever distance the job demands. Not quite fair to the metal. If aluminum works this well for power lines, it seems reasonable to assume it should have taken over household wiring too, especially once copper prices started climbing in the 1960s. For a few years, it actually did, and in a lot of houses built during that stretch, it caused real problems, enough that people still associate aluminum wiring with house fires today. That reputation is not quite fair to the metal itself. The failures traced back to specific causes, an early alloy that expanded and contracted more than expected at each connection, a layer of aluminum oxide that built up at those loosening connections and resisted current far more than the metal underneath, and outlets and switches designed and rated for copper, not for aluminum's particular behavior at a screw terminal. Once manufacturers developed a better alloy and connectors actually rated for aluminum, most of those specific failure points went away. The deeper reason copper stayed standard indoors has less to do with any of that and more to do with the job itself. A transmission line runs for miles between two endpoints and only has to survive weather and tension. A house is full of outlets and switches, hundreds of individual connections that get plugged and unplugged constantly, each one a place where a small problem can quietly become a fire. In an environment built entirely around dense, high-stakes connections, copper's forgiving behavior at a screw terminal matters more than saving weight on a wire that never has to hang between two towers in the first place. People who never wonder. On a hillside outside a substation, a transmission line engineer runs sag calculations for a new span, checking how far a proposed ACSR cable will droop between two towers on the hottest day of the year, when the metal expands and the line hangs at its lowest point. She has run this exact calculation more times than she could count, and the numbers rarely surprise her anymore. What she is really watching for is the one span somewhere down the line where they might. In the attic of a house built in 1968, a home inspector runs a flashlight along a bundle of dull silver wire and makes a note on his clipboard without any drama in his voice. He has seen this 100 times before. He knows exactly which alloy stamp to look for on the sheathing and exactly which connectors would make the difference between a routine note and a real hazard. Knowledge that never has to surface consciously anymore. It just appears the moment the flashlight lands on the wire. Driving beneath a transmission corridor at dusk, a delivery driver glances up at the cables strung between towers stretching off toward the horizon and thinks briefly about nothing at all. The lines are simply part of the landscape, the way a road sign or a fence line is part of the landscape. He has driven under them for years without once wondering what they are made of. The same cables, reinterpreted. Copper never stops being the better conductor. It never will be. What decides the outcome in each case is everything conductivity does not measure. The weight a cable adds when it has to hang unsupported for miles, the size of tower needed to carry that weight, and how forgiving a metal is at the hundreds of individual connections crammed inside a house. Aluminum wins the argument overhead, and copper wins the argument indoors, for the same underlying reason. Neither contest was ever really about which metal moves electrons fastest. It was about which material the rest of the system, towers or walls, budgets or building codes, could be built around without a fight. And that answer changes depending on which system is asking. If this changed the way you look at the power lines above you, let us know in the comments what you want us to explore next. We might make it our next episode. Thanks for watching. History often hides in the smallest details.